Well, hello there, and welcome to day 108 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today I am ending the horror genre theme that I've been carrying throughout the week. Unfortunately, this is the last of this set of videos that will be filmed in this location. It's a shame, actually. I'd really started to get quite fond of it, so that's going to be a shame going back to the previous setup. But yeah, this will be the last of that. And I thought, if I want to end the week with horror, I might as well talk about a classic and another linchpin of the cinematic horror genre. And that is the 1963 ghost story, The Haunting. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, there are certain foundational horror films that define the genre. And, I would consider this possibly being amongst their ranks, because this really defines the haunted house, the ghost story as seen through film lens. I mean, ghost stories have been portrayed from the inception of cinema because they are so easily told. And of course, in terms of adaptations, as I mentioned in early horror genre fare, there were numerous adaptations of classic literature. But I think there's something about the style of this and the atmosphere that it generates that really makes it stand out and start to shape our understanding of how to present horror in a psychological way. I mean, being 63, it means it stands shoulder to shoulder with, Hitchcock really hitting his stride, with Psycho. And actually, I think this and Psycho make a great double feature. I was thinking about Hitchcock a lot when I was watching this film, because I was trying to think whether Hitchcock had ever done a ghost story film. And I can't recall any. I think Hitchcock preferred to veer towards the more psychological and the more real world. Now, I might be wrong. I might be wrong in that respect. But as far as I can remember, he preferred thrillers and human studies rather than something more supernatural. Now, of course, later when you get to The Birds, he veers towards that, but that really is an exception. But really, if you put this alongside Psycho, it really has a very similar ethos to it. I mean, it's directed by Robert Wise, of course, cinema master of the 20th century. And so it has, a style and a visual expertise to it that really, the 60s, I think, were the era where we were delving deeper into the psychological in representing horror. And I don't want to say this is the starting point of true horror, because I don't want to dismiss what came before. But in terms of the modern cinematic narrative, this is really the starting point. The era when we got to do slightly darker, more complex stories that really, don't necessarily have good endings, and if they do, they're ambiguous and complicated. And I think that this film really encapsulates that, because any good ghost story, really, ghost stories as a structure are about the psychological, and like I said, that's why I was desperately scratching to see if Hitchcock had ever used the structure, because good ghost stories really are about us as people and about our minds, and The Haunting really wants to walk the line between reality and the supernatural, and whether something is entirely in someone's mind or through the perception of their mind, or whether it is actually happening. We have a great lead character in Nell, played by Julie Harris, who, even from the off, she is portrayed as someone who is fraught and traumatized and really in a really unsecure place. I mean, I keep drawing parallels to Psycho, but again, it's a very Marion Crane type role. I mean, it even has a section of her driving in a car that she sort of she's not committed a criminal act in this, but she's in a slightly more precarious position. And again, that's like Marion Crane, and it sort of shows someone who is really not in a good way at the start of the film, and then it only for her gets worse and more intense, and I think, to really portray the character through that, it shows a complexity and a real sense of playing with the audience. I mean, it's got a great cast. I mean, if you look at your primary four, which is, of course, Nell, Theodora, Luke, and Dr. Dr. I want to say Hayward, but I know that's not right. It'll come back to me. But yeah, Maywood. I feel like it's Maywood. I don't know why. But those primary four, they are really, considering we have a lot of setup with lots of history to this. I mean, it's opened. I'll say Richard Johnson, who portrays him until I can remember the name of the character, but he, narrates the opening and gives us this history of the house, and it's a history of trauma and death and troubled people, and it really sort of sets up the character of the house, and the character of the house is the most important character of the cast. And then, of course, we introduce Nell and her circumstances, and the fact that she was a carer for a sickly mother, and her life was given to that, and then that's over, and yet she has this controlling family and no identity, and it really sets up the house and Nell as our primary forces within this. I mean, as I say, a good ghost story is partly psychological, about people in fractious states and their grasp on reality, and again their experience of trauma, but then it's also, and I think this is a really we've really come back around to this in modern storytelling, but the idea of the location being a living entity. I mean, that's, I think, why something like The Shining probably overshadows this, because, of course, The Shining really mastered the idea of this all-consuming place that draws people in and then consumes them, practically, literally consumes. If nothing else, it consumes their souls. But that comes from this. That similarly, this has that sense of a living entity that requires almost a sacrifice, and it wants a certain person, and it creates that sense of fate to it. The idea that perhaps someone is always destined to come to this place, and they're always destined to end there. Their fate is tied up with this location. And again, because this is the kind of ghost story that doesn't put spirits on the screen, it doesn't put white figures walking around. What it does is the house itself is trying to haunt them and torment them, and I think that's really powerful. I mean, this story, of course, has been told several times now. I mean, this is obviously based on the 1959 novel, which then, of course, became this film. But then, of course, we had that terrible 1999 film, I want to say, with Catherine Zeta-Jones and Liam Neeson and Owen Wilson. That's actually quite fascinating in terms of if I were to do an essay or a video essay or any kind of written bit about why horror in the 90s was probably the worst period and the most the point in which horror as a genre had really declined the most, it would probably, in the 90s and early noughties, it would probably be this film, the 1999 The Haunting film, would be the case study of how we didn't really know. I don't know, there was something about Hollywood at that time that didn't know how to create a good horror, with the exception of like Scream and one or two others, but broadly, you know, you had the slashers and the Freddy and the Nightmare on Elm Streets, which had really gone into comedy or had really started to jump the shark. And this is before the sort of renaissance in the noughties with Japanese horror, and then the proper revival of good Western horror storytelling. But yeah, there was this period in the 90s where they just didn't get it. And the 1999 The Haunting film is just dreadful. It's offensively bad compared to this original. And then, of course, we've had The Haunting of Hill House, which is phenomenal. Genuinely a real tour de force, a real return to being able to understand this kind of storytelling. I don't know if I put it on par with the original. There are things in it I don't like, but then there are things in the original I'm not so keen on and I don't think has aged so well. But again, it shows that we've developed a nuanced understanding again of setting and atmosphere and character and the deeper psychological impact of this kind of storytelling. And I genuinely think this is great. You know, this is it's not the scariest film from the modern standpoint. You know, it suffers from the Citizen Kane syndrome, where it struggles to do anything that we haven't seen before. But there are moments in it where it truly, you know, Robert Wise really does get an opportunity to tell, really, you know, use cinematography to really show quite troubling shots or, you know, haunting images, and the escalation, you know, and you really understand how a character slowly loses her mind over the course of the film, and whether, you know, she believes the house wants her or whether it is all just her becoming psychologically unstable. I mean, what makes this film so rich is the fact that, you know, there are multiple readings. This film is so ambiguous, and I think true horror should have that ambiguity to it, that we understand it, but we don't fully, as I mentioned yesterday with Halloween, you know, we don't understand why Michael Myers is the way he is. We understand what he's doing, and we understand to some degree, okay, he's following a certain imperative, but we don't understand why. And I think, and of course, that, as I mentioned yesterday, that's also referencing to Jaws and to the xenomorph from Alien. We don't understand the motive. We understand broadly, but we can't get much deeper than the superficial. And similar to this leaves you with so many questions. As I've, you know, mentioned, it's about the sense of, well, is the entire thing in her mind? Are all the characters different aspects of her? You know, we have Theodora, who represents desire. We have Luke, who represents greed. And we have... oh, it's terrible. I don't know why, but the name of this character has completely just gone out of my mind. But Richard Johnson, who represents the rational and the, you know, the desire to learn. And it could entirely be in her mind, or it could be that she is just being drawn into a genuine psychological study, but because she believes it so much, she wills this into existence in her own perspective. You know, and you could take many readings of this. I mean, I'm sure I was seeing like a feminist or gendered reading on it about the fact that, like I said, you've got these four characters and each one has their own certain characteristic, and the idea that you would give the female characters more emotionality and the male characters more rationality, and it's like, well, what does, you know, did Robert Wise intend that? Did he, or was it some kind of underlying misogyny? Who knows? But like I say, there's something there. Of course, with the character of Theodora and the queer reading that you can take from it, which, of course, the later remakes, 99 and Haunting of Hill House from 2017, both, of course, take that character and make what is subtext in this version into text, because of course we can. But there it is, the idea that, okay, her sexuality is open and she's very flirtatious, particularly with Nell, and the implication that she has some interest in Nell of a sexual nature. Again, is that there? Is it being read into? The fact that, you know, I mean, this is text, but Nell, rather than subtext, but this is, you know, Nell and the Doctor's interest in each other. You know, is that Nell seeing something that's not there, or again, is it actually that there are feelings for each other, and so on and so forth, and it's you know, it's a really meaty bit of cinema, and there's a lot to unpack about it. So I do think it is a great film to end the week on, and really quite interesting. So, if you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and of course I've got over 100 videos, so if any take your fancy, please check them out. You can follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting movie-related content or TV-related content, news and links and videos. And of course, I share the new video release every day on Twitter. Thank you for joining me. Take care.